Hello everyone, welcome to our video series. This video series is made as part of the 10-part article that Mr. Leong Zihian and I have written about the taxes in Singapore. This series is on how much tax are Singaporeans really paying. So we have written a 10-part article to explain to Singaporeans that even though we have been told that Singaporeans pay one of the lowest taxes among the developed countries, but is this the case? We look at the statistics and we look at the amount of tax that Singaporeans are actually paying and how much we're getting back out of it to let us know once and for all the truth about the tax system in Singapore and how much we're really paying.
So for the first part of the article, we've decided to look at the wages of low-wage workers in Singapore and compare them with the wages of the Nordic countries. You can see that Singaporeans actually earn the lowest wages. Say for someone who earns $800 every month, say a cleaner, which is $9,600 in a year. As compared to all the Nordic countries, Singaporeans earn the lowest wage. Now if you deduct for personal income tax, Singaporeans pay the lowest income tax as compared to the Nordic countries, which is at 0%. But for the Nordic countries, they pay higher income tax. Actually for Finland pays 17.25%, whereas in Sweden and Denmark it's about 30%, and in Norway it's 0%. But the interesting thing to note is that because Social Security is actually the highest in Singapore, Singaporeans pay 20% into their CPF. If you look at the Nordic countries, Finland only needs to pay 5.15%, Sweden only needs to pay 7%, Norway 7.8%, and Danish pays only a $250 flat rate. So after deducting for that, Singaporeans would have only $7,680 left, again the lowest among the Nordic countries. So we deducted for food as well, transport, housing, and health. Please look at the article for the specific calculations for these amounts. But for healthcare, we assume that the person would need to pay about $1,000. In the Nordic countries, they only need to pay a flat rate. So for example, in Denmark, the citizens actually get healthcare for free. In Norway, they only need to pay a maximum of $407 every year. For Sweden, it's only $518 every year maximum. And for Finland, they only need to pay a maximum of about $1,022. So after deducting for healthcare, whatever the low-wage Singaporeans have left is only about $630. Now, if you look at expenditure for education, in Finland, education is actually free for all the citizens, even up to university as well as preschool. However, in Singapore, a person would still need to pay a significant amount of their wage into university education. So university fees in Singapore, the cheapest is $7,650, and for polytechnic is $2,300. But we assume that Singaporeans are able to get subsidies and they would need to pay about $2,000 every year for education, which is a very heavy subsidy if they are able to get it at all. So after deducting for education, a Singaporean would actually go into deficit and they would not be able to save. So what this means is that if you are a person who earns about $800 every month, you would have to forego some form of expenditure, say education or healthcare. Or for some people, they might have to cut down on food. But let's look at someone who earns $1,800 every month. So assuming that we're looking at the wage of a bus driver who earns $1,800 as compared to his Nordic counterparts or her Nordic counterparts, they earn significantly higher wages, and there are 35% of Singaporeans who earn $1,800 and below. So this means that this illustration is looking at about a third of Singaporeans. So after deducting for tax, CPF, food, transport, housing, healthcare and education, a person who earns $1,800 every month would actually go into a deficit of $217. So again, the person would have to forego some form of expenditure in education, in healthcare. How does it allow them to move up the social ladder, as is often claimed? It would be quite difficult. And imagine if they go into a deficit, the possibility of them being able to save and retire would be very minimal, which means that for a Singaporean who earn below $1,800 or even below $2,000, they would never be able to save or retire. Now, the problem is actually compounded by the fact that Singaporeans actually have one of the highest prices in the world. We actually have even higher prices than Denmark, Sweden and Finland. But our wages are significantly lower than them. We are earning a median income of about $3,000, but by right, what we should be earning should be about $6,000 if we are to be on par with the Nordic countries. So let's look at part 2 of the article. How much income does Singaporeans really have? So if you look at the share of income that a low-wage person has in Singapore, the poorest 20% in Singapore, how much share of income do they have? The poorest 20% only have 5% of the share of income in Singapore. In contrast, the richest 20% in Singapore actually have 49% of all the income in Singapore. And this is only the statistics from 1998 because we are not able to locate the statistics from later years. So we can see that for the poorest 20%, they only have 5% of the income, and for the richest 20%, they have 49% of the share of income in Singapore. What about for someone who is poor in the 40% zone? So if you look at the poorest 40% in Singapore, they only have 14% of the share of income. For the poorest 60%, they only have 29% of the share of income in Singapore. And if you look at the poorest 20%, we go back to the poorest 20%, they only have 5% of the share of income, and this is actually the lowest as compared to all the other high-income countries. In fact, in the Nordic countries, they have about 10%, so our poor is actually considerably poorer than the other high-income countries, and countries with the same price level. But for the rich, they actually have the highest share of income at 49%, and again, this is the highest among all the high-income countries. So what this means is that for the poorest 20%, they are the poorest as compared to the poor in the other high-income countries, and for the richest 20%, they are the richest as compared to the other high-income earners in the other high-income countries. And if we look at the poorest 60%, because they only have 29% of the share of income in Singapore, again, they have the lowest share of income. And if you look at the poorest 80%, now we are talking about 80% of Singaporeans here, we only have 51% of the share of income in Singapore, as compared to 64% in Denmark and Japan, and in the Nordic countries, more than 10 percentage points lower than the Nordic countries. For the poorest 80% of Singaporeans, we are actually poorer than the poorest 80% in the other high-income countries. Now note that this is the figure from 1998, which means that the income inequality has actually risen over the past few years from 1998. In fact, the Acting Minister of Culture, Community and Youth has also acknowledged that income inequality really started to increase in the late 1990s, which means that the income gap would have widened, and which would mean that the poorest 80%, we would most probably be having a lower proportion of the share of income in Singapore.
So you can see that Singaporeans are often told that we pay one of the lowest taxes in the world, in the high-income countries. But is that the case? You can see that for the low-income earners in Singapore, in fact for up to 80% of Singaporeans, we have the lowest share of income as compared to all the high-income countries. So if you look at it, not only do we have the lowest share of income among the high-income countries, we also are paid the lowest wages. Singaporeans earn the lowest median wages compared to the high-income countries, which means that even if we have low taxes, the purchasing power is much diminished because of the low wages that we're getting. So it really doesn't matter that Singaporeans are paying a low tax, because as compared to the Nordic countries, our purchasing power is low, and what we have in savings is, for the low-income workers, they have no savings and they have to go into debt, which means that they cannot save and they cannot retire, and they have to forego some form of expenditure, say for education or for healthcare, and they are not able to move up the social ladder. So looking at that, does Singapore really have low taxes, or is there a deeper issue that we need to analyze and look into? And this is what the other parts of the article will look into. How much tax do Singaporeans really pay, and how much are we really getting back? So stay tuned for the rest of our articles and the other parts of our articles.